My fiance invited her ex-BF to our wedding and called him the love of her life in front of everyone as a prank. She called me safe but boring, while I paid off her $34,000 credit debt and 150 guests. She thought the prenup was joke. She was wrong. I stepped to the microphone with a cold smile. What I revealed next made the entire front row turn pale. My name is Garrett. I'm 32. I own a freight logistics company with 19 employees. And on what was supposed to be my wedding day, I gave my fiancée exactly the special surprise she had been counting on. Just not the one she expected. I didn't grow up with money. My father drove a delivery truck for 23 years. My mother worked the front desk at a dental office. We weren't struggling, but we weren't comfortable either. There was always a version of the budget conversation happening somewhere in the background of my childhood. I watched both of them work hard for everything they had, and I decided early on that I was going to do the same. I started my freight logistics company at 24 with a used cargo van, a laptop, and one regional contract I had spent 4 months convincing a warehouse manager to give me. 8 years later, the company has 19 employees, a small fleet, and a net income. I'm not going to put a number on here except to say it's enough that I own my house outright, and I still drive the same truck I bought in 2018. I'm not flashy. I never have been. I build things slowly and I build them to last. I met Jessica at a cookout at a mutual friend's place 3 years ago. She was funny. She was sharp. She had a way of talking to people that made whoever she was with feel like the only person in the room. I was drawn to that. I thought it meant she was warm. I would spend the next 2 years slowly understanding that it was a skill, not a trait. There's a difference. We dated for 14 months before I proposed. During that time, I noticed things I filed away without acting on. She quit 2 jobs in the first year we were together. The first one was a toxic environment. The second, the commute was too much. She moved into my house 8 months in because her lease ended, and as she put it, it just made sense. After that, I covered everything: the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, dinners out, weekend trips, a vacation in the spring that she picked the destination for. I paid for all of it. She had opinions about every expense and contributed to none of them. I didn't keep score. I thought that's what you did when you were building something with someone. She was keeping score. I just didn't know it yet. By October, I had proposed. By November, something had shifted: a low-frequency unease I kept dismissing because I didn't have anything concrete to point to. Just a sense that the version of Jessica I thought I knew and the version that actually existed were not quite the same person. I was right. I just didn't have proof yet. 2 months into the engagement, a name started showing up. Tyler. It started small. Tyler had commented on one of her Instagram posts, just a congratulations, nothing alarming. Then he texted her when the engagement was announced. She mentioned it casually, the way you mentioned the weather. Tyler reached out. We go way back. It's sweet. I nodded. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I noticed, but I didn't react. There's a difference between those two things. Over the next 6 weeks, his name kept surfacing in places that didn't require it. Tyler used to take her to a restaurant we drove past. Tyler had a car like that one. Tyler said something funny at a party 10 years ago that she still thought about sometimes. None of it was dramatic. All of it was consistent. I asked her once, directly, no accusation, just a straight question, whether there was something I should know about Tyler. She laughed. She said I was being insecure. She said he was just an old friend and I needed to relax. I let it go. Outwardly. A week later, I found the texts. I wasn't looking for them. Jessica had left her phone face up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. A message preview came through from Tyler before the screen locked. I didn't pick up the phone. I read it from where I was standing. Are you sure you want to go through with this? You know I still think about you every day. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked to the garage, got in my truck, and sat in the dark for 20 minutes. I'm not a reactive person. Never have been. Confronting her that night would have told her exactly what I knew and exactly how much it had gotten to me, and then whatever was actually happening would go underground where I couldn't see it. I needed the full picture before I made a single move. The next morning, I called a private investigator. The private investigator delivered his report 3 weeks later. I read it at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning before work, coffee going cold next to me. I got through the first page and put it down. Then I picked it back up and finished it. The report confirmed that Tyler and Jessica had been in regular contact for at least 7 months. 7 months, which meant they were talking before I ever proposed. The PI had documented the pattern through message metadata and account activity. What the content showed was worse than an affair. It was a sustained, deliberate deception running parallel to everything I thought we were building together. In those messages, Jessica described me as safe but boring. She told Tyler she had settled because he wasn't ready to commit when they broke up 4 years ago. She said she was waiting to see if things changed. She was waiting, and in the meantime, she was living in my house and spending my money. The financial section stopped me cold. Jessica had never disclosed two things I had a right to know. First, she hadn't left her second job. She had been terminated. The reason on file: falsifying expense reports. Second, she was carrying $34,000 in personal debt across 3 credit accounts. Not a word about either one in 3 years together. Not when we got serious, not when she moved in, not when I put a ring on her finger. I sat with that for a while. Not out of heartbreak, or not only that, out of the specific feeling you get when you realize the math has never added up and you've been the only one too busy building something to notice. She needed my stability. She needed my house, my income, my name attached to hers. That was the actual foundation of what we had, not what I thought it was. I turned to the last flagged section. The PI had pulled 14 messages between Jessica and Tyler that referenced me directly. 14 times. In one, she called our relationship temporary. In another, she told him she was going through the motions. She never once said she loved me in any of those messages. Not in 14 chances. The 15th message was the one that changed everything. It had been sent 6 weeks before the wedding date. The PI flagged it separately from the rest, pulled to the top of the final page with a note that read, "Recommend immediate attorney consultation." Jessica told Tyler she wanted him at the wedding. She said she was going to say something during the ceremony. She wanted him there to see it. The PI noted in his summary that the message was not phrased like a fantasy or a passing thought. It was phrased like a plan, specific, deliberate, with a timing and an audience already chosen. She had given him a seat 3 rows from the front. I closed the report, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and called my attorney. 2 weeks before the wedding, the PI called me again. He said he had something else. He came to my office that afternoon and set a phone on my desk with a 9-minute audio file queued up. He told me it had been legally obtained and that he had already cleared the acquisition method with a colleague in civil litigation. I didn't ask for more detail than that. I pressed play. It was Jessica's voice. Then Tyler's. They were talking through the plan, not vaguely, not in code, but explicitly and in sequence. She had it timed to the ceremony. She was going to wait until the vow portion, when she had the microphone for her personal vows, and she was going to say it then. She was going to tell the room that Tyler was the love of her life. She was going to say she had made a mistake. She was going to say she couldn't go through with it. Tyler asked her how it was going to look. She said that was the point. It needed to be public. It needed to be in front of everyone, because that was the only way it meant something. Then Tyler asked about the money situation. Jessica told him not to worry about it. She said she had talked to someone who knew about these things. She said the prenuptial agreement was probably not even enforceable. She said her lawyer had looked at it and it seemed pretty standard. She said, "Garrett, that's me had more to lose socially than legally anyway." I sat in my office chair and listened to the last 2 minutes of that recording without moving. She said the prenup was probably not even enforceable. She had never actually read it. Here is what the prenuptial agreement actually said. I had drafted it 18 months earlier, before the engagement, before the ring, before any of this, on the advice of my business attorney. When your company employs 19 people and carries real assets, you get ahead of potential liability. That's not cynicism. That's just business. Jessica had signed it. Her attorney at the time was a general practice lawyer, not a family law specialist. The review took 1 meeting. What neither Jessica nor her lawyer had focused on was a clause in Section 4. My attorney had included it specifically to protect the business from reputational damage in the event of a hostile separation. In plain terms, it stated that if either party made public statements in any setting with third parties present that were designed to damage the other party's reputation, social standing, or professional relationships, the offending party immediately forfeited any claim to shared assets and became liable for documented financial damages. In other words, the moment Jessica stood up in front of 150 people and executed exactly the plan she had recorded herself describing, she would trigger that clause automatically. She was going to walk into it with a microphone in her hand and an audience watching. My attorney had written that clause thinking about a bitter divorce and a vengeful ex bad-mouthing me to clients. Neither of us had imagined I'd be invoking it at my own wedding ceremony. She had spent months engineering a public humiliation. She had signed a document that transformed that plan into the most expensive mistake of her life. And she had absolutely no idea. I called my attorney that evening and told him to clear his calendar for the following morning. My attorney's name is Donovan. He has handled my business contracts for 6 years, and he does not waste words. I walked into his office the next morning with the PI report, the financial records, the text documentation, the voice recording, and a copy of the prenuptial agreement. I put all of it on his desk. He spent 40 minutes going through it without saying anything. Then, he looked up and gave me 3 options. Option 1. Cancel the wedding immediately. Call it off. Return the gifts. Issue no explanation beyond irreconcilable differences. Clean emotionally. Legally inconclusive. Without a documented public violation of the prenup clause, Jessica could contest the agreement's enforcement and claim the cancellation was mutual. Her $34,000 in undisclosed debt and her termination history would complicate her position, but it would be a fight one with no clear winner and a long timeline. Option 2. Proceed. Let her execute the plan exactly as she had recorded herself describing it. Document the moment in real time, with independent witnesses and video, and then invoke the clause from a position of complete legal certainty. No ambiguity. No room to contest. The violation would be on record the moment she finished speaking. Option 3. Confront her privately. Give her the chance to walk away quietly, end the engagement without a public scene, and move on. I thought about option 3 longer than I expected to. There was a version of me that wanted the quiet ending, no audience, no spectacle, just done. But I kept coming back to the same problem. A person who spends months recording herself planning to humiliate someone in front of 150 people does not deserve to walk away with a clean story. If I gave her the quiet exit, she would write her own version of events. She would be the one who walked away. She would never have to stand in front of the same crowd she had chosen as her audience and answer for what she had actually done. That wasn't a resolution, that was just a different kind of loss. I chose option 2. Donovan filed a precautionary legal notice that afternoon, a formal step that established the timeline of our knowledge and protected the evidentiary chain. He also advised me to ensure the ceremony was thoroughly documented by independent sources. I told him the venue already had a contracted videography package. I had paid for it 4 months earlier as part of the event deposit. He didn't smile, but something shifted in his expression. He said, "Good. Don't cancel it." I didn't. The 11 days between that meeting and the wedding were the strangest of my life, and also, in a way, the calmest. I went to work. I answered emails. I confirmed the catering head count. I helped my groomsmen sort out a buttonhole situation the day before the rehearsal. I acted, in every external way, like a man looking forward to his wedding. No one who saw me during those 11 days would have had any reason to think otherwise. That was the point. The rehearsal dinner was on a Thursday evening at a private room in a downtown restaurant, Jessica's choice, my card on file. 60 guests, open bar, the kind of warm lighting that makes everyone look better than they are. Jessica moved through the room like she owned it. She laughed easily, made the rounds, squeezed my hand at the table at exactly the right moments. I watched her do all of it and felt something I can only describe as clarity. This was the performance. The version of her that everyone in that room believed in. The version I had believed in, once. Tyler was there. His name wasn't on the rehearsal dinner list. Jessica introduced him near the bar as an old college friend. He's in town. I saw her touch his arm twice while they were laughing. I clocked it the way I clock anything I need to remember. Twice. Left arm, near the elbow, both times. After dinner, I texted Donovan the confirmed seating assignment, 3rd row, aisle seat, left side of the venue. His response came back in 2 words. Perfect placement. I drove home, set my suit out for the morning, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in weeks, which I found strange at first. Then I thought about it, and it made complete sense. There was nothing left to prepare. Everything was already in position. The only variable I couldn't control was whether Jessica would actually go through with it. She would. I knew she would. When someone has been building toward a moment for months, they don't step back from it the night before. That moment had become the whole point for her. She needed it. She had earned it in her own mind. She was going to take it. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. Tomorrow was going to be, as Jessica had told me that night with a smile pressed against my cheek, absolutely unforgettable. She was right about that. I was up at 6:15 on the morning of my wedding. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the prenuptial agreement to Section 4. I had read that clause probably a dozen times over the past 11 days. I read it again, not because I had forgotten it, because I wanted it to be the last thing I confirmed before the day started, the way a pilot runs through a checklist, not out of doubt, but out of discipline. Donovan had arranged for a paralegal to attend the ceremony as a guest. She would be seated in the middle section with a discreet audio recorder running from the moment the ceremony began. Her role was simple: secondary documentation. The venue's contracted videographer was already confirmed for full coverage from 2 angles. Between the 2 sources, there would be no gap in the record. The only person I told anything to that morning was my best man, Fletcher. I pulled him aside in the parking lot while the other groomsmen were inside getting their boutonnieres sorted. I didn't give him the full story. I gave him one instruction. If I adjusted my left cufflink at any point during the ceremony, he was to make sure the videographer was actively recording and then stand down completely. No matter what happened after that, he was not to intervene, not to step in, not to say a word. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, I've got you." Fletcher has known me for 12 years. He understood that if I was telling him this on the morning of my wedding, the situation had already been handled. He didn't need more detail than that, and I didn't need him to ask for any. Now let me be honest about what could have gone wrong, because the risk was real and I knew it going in. If Jessica had gotten cold feet not about marrying me, but about the plan itself, I would have stood at that altar and exchanged vows with a woman I had a 9-minute recording of, and no documented violation to attach to it. The prenup clause was only enforceable against a public act. Without that act, the whole legal structure collapsed. I would have been left with $28,000 in wedding costs I'd already absorbed, a marriage I would have had to dissolve through conventional channels, and a fight over assets that should have been straightforward but wasn't anymore. The quiet version of this story was the expensive one. So yes, I needed her to go through with it. There was also something else I had to deal with that morning, and I'm going to say it plainly because it's part of the story. Somewhere underneath the documentation and the legal prep and 11 days of holding everything steady, there was a grief I had been filing away for later. I had genuinely loved the version of Jessica that I thought existed, not the one on that recording. The one from 3 years ago at a cookout, sharp and funny, making everyone feel like the only person in the room. I know now that version was a performance from the beginning, but I had loved it as if it were real, and that meant something had to be grieved. I put it somewhere I could find it after today, because that afternoon I needed to be someone who had already processed it. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup. I put on my suit. I had a job to do. The venue was everything it was supposed to be. Outdoor ceremony, Denver skyline behind the arch, late afternoon sun cutting across the rows of white chairs. 150 people dressed up and seated and waiting. The kind of setting that costs what it costs because it makes everything look inevitable, like of course, this is where 2 people would choose to begin something. I walked out, shook the officiant's hand, and stood at the altar. I did not look at Jessica's side of the crowd. I looked straight ahead. Then, in my peripheral vision, I found the 3rd row, aisle seat, left side. Tyler was there in a gray suit, arms folded, jaw set, trying to look like he belonged. I adjusted my left cufflink. 30 feet behind me, I heard the videographer shift position. Jessica came down the aisle on her father's arm. She was wearing a dress she had spent 4 months selecting. She looked beautiful. She knew it. She smiled at me the entire walk down, warm, steady, the performance at its absolute peak. I smiled back. We both knew something the other 148 people in those chairs did not. The officiant began. We moved through the opening. Then he reached the vow portion and nodded to Jessica, who had arranged, with my apparent full support, to deliver personal vows she had written herself. She had made the request 3 months ago. I had said, "Of course, whatever you want." She took the microphone. She looked out at the crowd first, not at me. She said she had a special surprise she wanted to share before they continued. She said there was something she needed to say out loud, in front of everyone who mattered, because it had been inside her long enough. She talked about a love she had carried for years, someone who had shown her what real connection felt like, someone she had lost and spent a long time believing she would never find again. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this. Every word landed exactly where she intended it to. She turned toward the 3rd row. She said Tyler's name. She said he was the love of her life. She said she had made a mistake, and she was sorry it had taken her this long to say it where it counted. She said she could not go through with this wedding. The crowd went silent. Not the polite silence of a ceremony. The hard, airless silence of a room that has just had something detonated in it. Someone near the back made a sound that wasn't quite a word. A woman 2 rows from the front put her hand over her mouth. Then the whispers started moving through the rows like a current low. Fast. The sound of 150 people trying to process the same thing at the same time. Tyler stood up from the 3rd row, slowly, like he'd been waiting for his cue. Because he had. 150 people turned to look at me. I straightened my jacket. I reached into my inside pocket and took out a Bluetooth speaker about the size of a deck of cards. I set it on the officiant's podium. I connected it to my phone. I looked out at the crowd, and I said, clearly and without any particular emotion in my voice, "Since we're doing special surprises, I have one too." I pressed play. Jessica's voice came out of that speaker and filled the outdoor venue. Then Tyler's voice. The part where she called me safe and boring. The part where she described our relationship as temporary, as going through the motions, as something she had settled for because he wasn't ready 4 years ago. The part where Tyler asked about the money situation. The part where she said the prenuptial agreement was probably not even enforceable, that her lawyer had barely looked at it, that I had more to lose socially than legally anyway. I let it run for 4 minutes. The most relevant 4 minutes of 9. I watched the crowd while it played. I watched faces shift confusion, then recognition, then something harder. A few people turned to look at Tyler, still standing in the 3rd row. He sat back down somewhere in the 2nd minute. By the time the recording reached the part about the prenup, he was studying the ground in front of his shoes, like it owed him an answer. Jessica stood at the altar with the microphone still in her hand and nowhere useful to go. When I stopped the recording, the venue was quieter than it had been before the ceremony started. I looked at Tyler. I looked at Jessica. I said, "The prenuptial agreement she signed contains a public disparagement clause. By making those statements in front of witnesses, she has triggered that clause and forfeited any claim to shared assets. Her attorney has already been notified. This ceremony is over." I pocketed my phone. I turned and walked toward the venue exit. The late afternoon sun was still hitting the arch behind the altar. The flowers were still arranged exactly as the coordinator had placed them that morning. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago. That struck me as strange for half a second, and then it didn't. Behind me, I heard Jessica say my name. Once. The way someone says a word when they've just realized it's the last card they have and it isn't worth anything anymore. I didn't turn around. The crowd parted without me having to ask. I kept walking. I didn't look back.